so much about what the public hears about vaccines is really like a religion. It's based on dogma, it's based on repetition, it's not based on the evidence. There is what public health authorities tell the public, and then there's what they say under oath.
My guest today, Aaron Siri, has been at the center of that fight for transparency. He's an attorney who's taken on the FDA and the CDC and big pharmaceutical companies, not to push an agenda, but to demand answers the public deserves to know. He's managing partner at Siri and Glamstead, where he's led major cases about vaccine safety data, medical freedom, and government accountability. In this episode, we talk about why he got involved in this space and how politics, profit, and public health have become so tightly intertwined.
A vaccine to me is a product that causes so much harm that it cannot survive on the market without having immunity for liability for its injuries.
What was the origin to start asking questions about vaccines?
I would say the first thing I've ever learned about vaccines, that you cannot sue to claim the company making it could have made it safer and my kid wouldn't have died, my kid would have been injured, my family member would be not have suffered through whatever they suffered from it.
Hi, Aaron, and welcome to Common Denominator.
Thanks for having me.
So, Aaron, I love the name of your new book, Vaccines, Amen. And there's many reasons why I do, but what inspired you to call it that? And, why in that space of kind of religion, the religion of vaccines?
Well, after 10 years of litigating around vaccines, we've got about 50 people in my firm that just do vaccine work. And, we can't rely on titles. We have to prove what we say about vaccines with actual data, evidence in court. And so over those last 10 years of deposing the world's leading vaccinologists, litigating against state health departments across the country, endless lawsuits against federal health authorities. We probably, as you and I talk right now, about 100 federal lawsuits against CDC, NIH, FDA. In all of those contexts and all those legal work, we can't just rely on slogans, dogma, mantra. I've got to prove everything I say about vaccines, and I get to hold them to their proof about anything they say about vaccines. And along that journey, what I've come to realize is so much about what the public hears about vaccines is really kind of like a religion. It's based on dogma, it's based on repetition, it's not based on the evidence. There is what public health authorities tell the public, and then there's what they say under oath in a deposition, on the stand, or what they have to respond to when you get a discovery request and have to produce proof. And so I lay that all out in the book, and that's why I call the book Vaccines, Amen, the religion of vaccines. Because I often find, even when I confront, vaccinologists and doctors with actual hard evidence, their beliefs persist even in the face of evidence, hence their beliefs.
I love that you called it that, because for me, I think of a friend of mine called all religions, really, it's a kind of leap of faith. It's a belief. In the same way, if you don't have God or a religion or dogma, you can have sports, you can have things, and you watch people where you see kind of their eyes. There's like pure evidence of this is what it's going to be, this is what it is. And for some reason, people don't want to believe otherwise. Is it just that kind of that's everything that they know? Why are people not able to see the evidence for what it is? Why is it so ingrained? And again, in any topic, because we could talk about many topics that people have just seen it, right? It's like, I think of like to the extent where, they use that example where everybody's kind of jumping off a bridge. Are you going to go ahead and do that even though you know that that's bad? Is that how we work as a human species?
On the topic of vaccines, I could say that a reason that the evidence is difficult for some people to just accept, for some, not for everybody, for some, is that it can cause cognitive dissonance. And I'll give you an example, okay? On the CDC website, it says vaccines do not cause autism. That's what it says. Categorical. Vaccines do not cause autism. Now, Anybody out there who sees that phrase assumes that means it's backed by studies, because that's how you do science. You have peer-reviewed studies, you have a literature, and you look to the peer-reviewed studies to see, okay, what is the state of the science on a given topic? Science obviously also evolves over time, right? It's a living thing in a way. We, on behalf of our client, the Informed Consent Action Network, wanted to know what are the studies relied upon to support the claim vaccines do not cause autism for all the vaccines given in the first 12 months of life, right? And almost all of which are given in the first 6 months of life. You get five different vaccines, three injections each. Those are the routine ones. There are others, but you get those, which is DTaP, IPV, HIB, Prevnar, and Hep B. Each of those are injected 3 times each. So 15 injections of 5 different vaccines from birth to 6 months of age. Autism is often diagnosed between 6 months and 12 months of age. So obviously, if you want to say vaccines don't cause autism, you got to have studies that show those vaccines don't cause autism. So we submitted a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request to the CDC. That is the legal tool that the public can use to get data, information, emails, studies, you name it,
Mm,
out of our federal health authorities. That is how we check on those whose salaries we pay with our tax dollars, right? When we submitted the FOIA request to the CDC for those studies, we said, hey, can you give us the studies that show that those vaccines don't cause autism individually or collectively? They didn't respond. We sued them in federal court. And eventually, as the status hearing date approached, they clearly had no choice but to finally produce something. So they gave us a list of 20 studies. Well, I read the list and I called up the DOJ attorney and I said, hey, are you sure that this is the list that the CDC wants to tell the entire world it relies upon to support that these vaccines don't cause autism? 19 of these have nothing to do with the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life. They have to do with MMR vaccine or an ingredient that's not in any of these vaccines. One of them was an Institute of Medicine review that looked at whether DTaP vaccine doesn't cause autism, and it scoured the whole literature and it couldn't find any to support that DTaP doesn't cause autism. He found one study, Geyer and Geyer, that did show a correlation between DTaP and autism, but the IOM threw it out because it was based on something called VAERS data. So I said, you provided a list of 20 studies, and it only has one study in it because there are 4 reviews and 16 studies. And in the 4 reviews, there was one study that actually looked at any of these vaccines, and it did find a correlation between the vaccine and autism. I said, "Are you sure?" Like, I'm giving the
mm,
CDC another chance, right, Moshe? I'm giving him another chance. He came back and said, "No, this is it." Well, he, meaning the DOJ on behalf of the CDC, signed it, the stipulation. I signed it on behalf of ICANN. Federal judge entered it and signed it as a federal court order. And there you have it. This is the evidence. This is as good as you're going to get. Where else can you go? What else are you going to do? You have your list of the studies the CDC relies upon to show that vaccines don't cause autism for all the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life.
mm,
And they don't have any studies. I also have deposed world leading vaccinologists on this same question. They don't have the studies either. We've also done subsequent FOIAs. They still don't have the studies. So, and anybody who wants can go and read this themselves. It's all in black and white. It's on ican'tdecide.org's website. You can go and see the stipulated order. You can look at the studies yourself. So here you are. And you can also watch me deposing some of the world's leading vaccinologists, asking them the same questions. Are there studies that DTaP doesn't cause autism? That go down the list. They don't have any.
mm,
And so if you're somebody in the public, you've been told, you've been assured that vaccines do not cause autism, okay? Now, to be clear, I'm not saying the vaccines do cause autism. That's a separate question. But you've been told by the federal health authorities that vaccines do not cause autism. And when you're presented with the proof that they don't have the studies to support that, what are you going to do? What
mm,
that does is it causes cognitive dissonance. And a lot of people go, whoa, whoa, whoa. If that's true, that they don't really have the studies to show it, they're just saying that without real science, what else do I have to question? What else can't I trust? And people start going down, this, well, I don't want to go to that place, especially, you know, on this issue where that if you don't believe that vaccines don't cause autism, you're anti-science, you're go down the list of pejoratives, right?
Mhm.
So people don't wanna be that person. They don't wanna be an anti-science quack and say, "Well, I don't believe," and that's the problem. Because you don't hear people say, "I believe in cars, I believe in floorboards, I believe in plants or desks," but people say, "I believe in vaccines," and you often hear the language of faith around these products. Well, you
Mhm.
believe vaccines cause autism? You don't believe vaccines don't cause autism? You don't hear that in other areas often, but you hear it in this one because that is a belief. The claim that vaccines don't cause autism is not science. It's not backed by studies. It's a belief. And I know that's disjarring for a lot of folks, but, just take a look at
Yeah.
chapter 11 of my book, read and you can read the deposition excerpts, you can read the court stipulation, and if you can find the study that contradicts it, love to see it.
Aaron, I know, you mentioned you've been working on this with 50 different law partners in this space. What put you on to this? What was the origin to start asking questions about vaccines? What was the origin for you and your family?
Well, I would say the first thing I've ever learned about vaccines was I got a bunch of documents sent to me one evening while I was working late at a huge law firm that I used to work at, one of the biggest firms in the country. This is well over a decade ago. It's a long time ago. And I didn't understand any of the science, but I didn't understand anything about immunology, vaccinology, infectious disease. But what I did understand was how the law works, and I understood how conflicts of interest work, and I don't understand what motivates big corporations. And when I saw that there was something called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, this is a law passed in 1986 that gave pharmaceutical companies immunity for the injuries caused by their vaccines to the extent that you can't sue them to claim, hey, had you made your vaccine safer, my child wouldn't have died. My child wouldn't have been seriously injured. Okay. It gave them immunity. You can't sue them
Mm,
for that. It is the only product in America that I know of that you cannot sue to claim the company making it could have made it safer and my kid wouldn't have died, my kid wouldn't have been injured, my family member would be not have suffered through whatever they suffered from it. It's the only product. When I saw that law, um, I was shocked. I mean, I was representing big corporations in America, Goldman Sachs, go down the list at that time. And, when you look around corporate America, and this is not specific to any company, this is just corporate America in general, and you go into any boardroom, they make decisions based on what is best for the company's bottom line. They don't make decisions based on what's moral or ethical. I mean, that factors into the extent it would harm their finances. Boardroom that says, hey, you know what? We're going to make a decision about what's moral, even if it loses us money.
mm,
Those folks are out pretty fast. That CEO is fired. That CFO is gone. That COO is history. They want to see results for Wall Street and their bottom line. That's what they're there to do as a corporation, make money. And so, in the normal course, that's fine. That's good.
mm,
That capitalism is excellent in America because if you injure folks, you end up potentially upside down. You end up losing money, and companies don't want to do that. So they have a financial self interest to make sure the product's as safe as possible before it goes on the market, any product, and also to continue to monitor safety. That's why you have recalls and so forth. Something as simple as, using a new, chemical in a floorboard. Is it going to cause cancer? Is it carcinogenic? You might look at that because you're worried. You don't want to be held liable later as a company.
mm,
You don't want to end up upside down. Same is true for drug products, right? With drug products, pharmaceutical companies are liable. So they want to know how safe it is before their license, which is why with drugs, pharmaceutical companies will often do multi-year
mm,
placebo-controlled trials before a drug goes to market because they want to know its safety profile. Their economic self-interest is to know that, to not lose money after it goes on the market. But when it comes to vaccines, it's the only product I know where the financial interest is inverted. They have a financial disincentive to look at safety before licensure because the more they look at safety, the less likely it would get licensed. As I lay out in chapter 10 of my book, I go through every clinical trial for each childhood vaccine. And you'll see they're often licensed based on days or weeks of safety review after injection, maybe up to six
Mm.
months. None of them had a placebo control before licensure, none of the routine injected childhood vaccines. And they're often underpowered, meaning they don't have enough kids in the trial. Not a single one of those clinical trials to license a single routine injected childhood vaccine actually assessed the safety of those products before they went to market. You don't need to take my word for it. It's all in the FDA documentation. All of it's cited in chapter 10 of my book. I go through every trial. The point is this: that financial disincentive causes them to not look at safety before licensure nor after licensure. And that has put vaccines into a truly unique
Mm.
category. So going all the way back to your question, that was a long road. What was the
Yeah.
first thing that I learned? I learned about this law. And the moment I saw that law, I just was like, "Whoa." It just, I mean, immediately hit me. This is a problem. This creates a real perverse incentive for corporations to not care about safety, not because they're cruel, not because they're mean, because they have no economic interest to do it. And that all
Mm.
came about in 1986 when Congress passed this law. Uh,
Even though they don't have liability, in order to get approved by the FDA, I guess it's the FDA, right, that approves, or is it the CDC? Yeah, I guess it's the
the
FDA.
FDA that would license
It would
a vaccine
license,
product.
right?
Yep.
So I would think just based on process and procedure from the FDA, it would be the same in order to license as a drug, the same process and procedure for the vaccine. Is that not accurate? In other words, the same, wouldn't they have, you have to do step 1, step 2, step 3
Mhm.
before I license? Is there a difference there?
Yes, it's very different. For
Mm.
drugs, they go through a different division at the FDA, okay?
Mm.
There's the drug division that reviews it. Separately, there's a biologics division within which there's the office relating to vaccines, and they're the ones that decide on licensure of vaccines. So it's different officials at the FDA that decide on licensure of drugs versus vaccine products. Okay. Now, when it comes to drug products, the FDA is not going out there and promoting and touting drugs. They don't go and say, go get your statins. But the FDA does do that with vaccines. They're extremely
Mm.
conflicted. They really act like partners with industry. Now, I can't tell you precisely, get you into the head of every official at the FDA and tell you why would they let. I'll give you an example. The top four selling Pfizer drugs. So I'm not cherry picking. Top four selling Pfizer drugs. Okay. Each have multi-year placebo-controlled trials before they were licensed. On the FDA website, you can go and pull up the licensure documents, or you can just pull up the package insert. A big piece of paper you get in every drug. So you
Mm.
open it up, you go to section 6.1, and that summarizes the clinical trial relied upon to license that product. So if you open it for those top four selling Pfizer drugs, you'll see multi-year placebo-controlled trial. But let's start with the vaccine given on the first day of life, the Hep B vaccine. Okay, there's two of them on the market: Recombavax HB and Drexb. Recombavax HB. Go to the FDA website. Go pull up the package insert. Go to section 6.1, or even look at the underlying clinical trial documents. Was licensed, placed in a clinical trial that had 147 children to monitor safety for 5 days after injection, and no control.
Mm.
If you wanted me to make up, to dream up the most nefarious, craziest thing I could say about vaccines, I would not even have thought to say that. But that is the fact. I know that because it's in the package insert. I know it because we FOIA'd the FDA for the underlying clinical trial reports, which are all on ICANN Decide's website, which you can read for yourself. I've deposed the person who was the principal investigator of that clinical trial, Dr. Stanley Plotkin, with regards to that clinical trial. Okay, so first, let's go through the problems with this trial. One, it has no placebo control group. It has no control group at all. So what are you comparing the group that gets the vaccine against? You don't have a baseline to compare it against. So it's utterly useless to start with. But let's assume it had a placebo control. Then, how long did it review safety? Only 5 days of safety monitoring after
Mm.
injection. So even if it had a placebo control, useless because it only reviewed safety for 5 days. You inject a baby, 5 days of safety monitoring, you don't know whether the child has all forms of issues until years later anyway, developmental and so forth. Then let's assume you had a placebo control. Let's assume that you reviewed safety for long enough, a few years. Then you need enough kids. needs to be called properly powered, as an epidemiologist would say. 147 kids is not going to let you detect anything with enough power to reach any conclusion. So the other, by the way, Hep B vaccine reviewed safety for monitored safety 4 days after injection. So why did the FDA do this? To your point, right? I don't know any drug that was licensed with that kind of ridiculous data, but they do with vaccines. Why the FDA allows it is a great question. My book goes through a lot of the history and the development of vaccines in our health agencies and answers that question. But it comes down really to the fact that they really view themselves as partners with the industry, and they have an assumption that these products are safe even before they're licensed, which has obviously very can be very dangerous and has had very dangerous consequences.
Just process and procedure of licensing the COVID vaccine. What happened there? Is it I guess it's considered a vaccine, so it went to the FDA Department of Vaccines,
Yes.
but how they called it Operation, I guess, Warp Speed, if I remember correctly. So what happened as far as the procedure till it got licensed in actuality, if you're familiar with that?
Yeah, very familiar
Just
with it.
curious.
We sued
Mm,
the FDA to release all of the documents the FDA relied upon to license Pfizer's COVID vaccine and Moderna's COVID vaccine. You might have seen the news report. The FDA wanted to wait 55 years and 75 years to release it all and so forth. Really, it was hundreds of years because once we knew the total number of documents. But putting that aside, so just to make sure that your audience is aware of this, the clinical trial conducted to license any drug or vaccine is conducted by the company seeking to license the product. Just making sure everybody
mm,
knows that. It's not done by some third party. It's not done by the FDA. It's done by the company itself. It pays researchers and so forth to conduct a clinical trial. It then gathers that data, puts it together in a certain form, and then it submits it to the FDA. So all the FDA is getting is the distilled, compiled data from the company seeking licensure. It then
mm,
goes and reviews that. Now, when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine, Pfizer, for example, went and conducted a clinical trial for its product, for the COVID-19 vaccine. It compiled that data. The protocols for that trial are actually publicly available. It's not the most fun read, but I've read it. You can read it. That data was then submitted to the FDA, and the FDA then reviews it and tries to decide whether it deems to the FDA standard, which is a technical standard. It's not a standard that most people would think that it really is about actually finding safety. It's really more about meeting certain technical standards, safe, effective, and so forth, so it can get onto the market.
mm,
In that clinical trial for Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine, for example, I know there's a lot of reports that it was rushed and so forth, but really, ironically, if you're going to take a vaccine based on its clinical trial, how robust this clinical trial was, as poor as as the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine trial was, compared to childhood vaccines trial, it's actually the most robust
mm.
clinical trial that compared to all the rest of the childhood vaccines. One, it had a placebo control group. Now they vaccinated the control group after approximately 2 months of, the average of 2 months of folks in the placebo control group then got the shot, called it crossing over, but they had one for at least 2 months. They had about 30 to 42,000 people, depending on was Moderna or Pfizer's trial, and they reviewed safety for 6 months. Compared to most childhood vaccine clinical trials, that's actually really robust. Now there's a lot of shenanigans that went on, in my opinion. I'll give you a quick example, and then I'll stop. Clinical trials are supposed to be statistical comparisons between the group that gets the product and the group that doesn't, right? Why? Because you don't want to inject bias. That's the whole point. It's a new thing. It's a new product, a new drug, new vaccine. And so we're going to statistically compare the outcomes between these two groups so that we don't introduce bias into the analysis.
Mhm.
Now, in Pfizer's trial, they recorded, of course, deaths. That's the most important outcome, right? So you would
Mm,
assume more people died in which group? The vaccine group or the placebo group? You would assume more people died in the placebo group,
okay,
right? Because they
fair.
didn't get the vaccine. That's not what happened. 21 people died in the vaccine group. 17 died in the placebo group. Okay.
Mm,
21 to 17. Now, that should have been the end of that product. Okay. Should have been over. Because the point is you don't inject your bias. You say, You're not saving lives with this product. We're not licensing it." Instead, the FDA let Pfizer explain every single death away. Okay.
mm.
Look under the hood, look at say, "Oh no, well, this had to do with that, this had to do with that, this had to do with that." But
By the
when
way,
it
that was
came
the only study, I was just curious, that was the only study that was the main study. What you're talking about is the main
that is
study,
the clinical
the study.
trial
Okay, I just wanna
relied
make
upon for
sure what we're talking.
license,
Yeah. Right.
Pfizer
Okay,
COVID-19, meaning this is the randomized controlled clinical trial,
okay.
the thing that they say is the gold standard, what,
Right.
the FDA relied upon to
Okay.
license the product. This is the clinical trial, okay? Also known as the pivotal trial, okay, or stage 3 trial, the pivotal trial. This was it. Remember you hear on the news 95% effective? You know what that referred to? Not reduction in deaths, not reduction to anything serious. That was there was about 8 cases of folks who tested positive for COVID-19 and had some symptoms, often like just sniffles, in the vaccinated group, and about 160 that had tested positive for COVID-19 vaccine in the placebo group, typically sniffles. So they said, "Oh, see, 95% effective, 9." They did a statistical comparison. So when the results fit the dogma, they did a statistical comparison. But here's the thing. Understand, it's not like they were just routinely testing people. At a time when they were giving out free tests to everybody to be tested for COVID-19, if you recall, they
Mhm.
didn't do that. They didn't test everybody weekly. They didn't even test everybody that had symptoms. When you look at the underlying trial data, which we like got after a federal lawsuit, there were thousands of other instances of people with apparently symptoms. All of those folks did not appear to have been tested.
Mm.
All of those folks did not end up in that analysis. If you were going to look under the hood and inject bias, it shouldn't have been on the deaths. It should have been on that 95% number. Because what happened to all the other folks that had symptoms that maybe not have gotten tested or weren't included or weren't counted? Talk about an opportunity to inject bias. That was an opportunity to inject bias. I'm not the only one that's written about this. Other Dr. Peter Doshi and so forth, other eminent researchers have looked at this and raised these concerns about the data. So, yes, there's that clinical trial was the most robust as compared to childhood vaccines. It was incredibly anemic as compared to clinical trials for drugs. And for what it was, in my opinion, it was very problematic just on the basis of what I just told you. There are far there are lots and lots of other issues, but, I won't get into those. That should be enough.
And the concept, from what I understand, the mechanism, maybe just to touch a little bit, I see that there's a lot of conversation on mRNA. Just maybe for the layperson,
Sure.
what does that mean? What is that mechanism for mRNA? Because we hear it a
Sure.
lot.
So mRNA is, another technology used to create vaccine, this type of vaccine. There's lots of different technologies for different vaccines. The Hep B vaccines that are given to babies we discussed earlier is something called recombinant DNA technology. Okay. MMR vaccines, for example, are used something called they're attenuated vaccines. They take the virus and they passage it through, either the aborted fetal cell line, aborted cells from an aborted fetal cell line, or they passage through monkey kidney cells and so forth to attenuate them. Or you have something called toxoid vaccines. There are subunit vaccines. There's lots of different types of technology used for different types of vaccines.
Mm.
For the COVID-19 vaccines by Pfizer and Moderna, they use something called mRNA technology, which was something different than all the other technologies. And in this instance, what they essentially did is they took a modified version of RNA and they swapped out one of it's a synthetic form to keep it simple of RNA. Okay. Because if it was actually, naturally occurring RNA, not synthetic, it would just degrade in the body. Then need to deliver it into cells, so they put it in a lipid nano particle. They basically wrap it in a form of fat, and then when it gets into the body and injected, it delivers that synthetic form of RNA into the cell. Then it goes processed through the ribosomes, and your body actually creates through that synthetic RNA.
Yeah.
It creates the antigens that then get picked up by our immune system to create antibodies, okay? Look, I know a lot of folks talk about, well, this is a new technology. They're all new technology. When recombinant DNA vaccines came out, it was a new technology. Each vaccine, there are lots of different technologies. To me, it's not about how long did it take you to get to this new technology. mRNA technology has been in development for decades. It's about how robust was the trial that you used to study it in human beings, and we could rely on that to say it was safe. That's what's critically important, right? Not how long it took to create the technology. The other thing I'll say, I'm gonna give you my definition of a vaccine. To me, a vaccine doesn't matter whether it's mRNA, it doesn't matter whether it's recombinant, it doesn't matter whether it stopped transmission, doesn't. A lot of vaccines don't stop transmission, nothing to
Mm,
do with it. A vaccine to me is a product that causes so much harm that it cannot survive on the market without having immunity for liability for its injuries.
mm.
That's what a vaccine is. And to me, that's part of why I think this technology, these vaccines, were put into the vaccine category because they needed immunity from liability for the injuries that they're going to cause.
And I know you were talking about before whether the vaccines cause autism, and there's that debate that exists. And there was an announcement a few weeks ago that they were talking about the mother, maybe touch on that, the mother taking Tylenol while they're pregnant. Um, it seems from the research that I've seen, and kind of what you're pointing out, it seems that it might be a little more than Tylenol. I don't know, but that's what I saw. That was said. That was the official announcement, right? That the spike, I don't know what the numbers is. It 1 in 35 kids now compared to 1 in 10,000 that have some form of autism that are being born nowadays. So touch on that, like
Sure.
why that statement was made. Is it accurate from your research? You've been doing this 10 years plus. What's going
I
on there for parents?
Yeah. I mean, I think what HHS and you might have seen the press conference with Secretary Kennedy and with the president. I think they made pretty clear that they're not saying acetaminophen, Tylenol causes all cases of autism. I think that they were saying this is one thing that they've identified has some basis in the science to associate with autism, and they're going to be doing more reports later for other potential things. So I think this was a beginning to identify one thing that the literature has some support for, and as they go down the road of identifying it, obviously, any kind of environmental insult could cause harm, right? Whether it's forever
Mm.
chemicals, whether it's go down the list. The more environmental chemicals, environmental exposures that an individual has, the more likely there is to be some kind of pathology, some kind of issue that arises. To be sure, for example, no doubt vaccines can cause certain harms, but they don't cause all harms for sure, right?
Mm.
There are many things. So I think that's what they're doing. They're doing a holistic look at any potential causes. In this instance, for ASD, autism spectrum disorder, which, as you noted, has exploded from in the last 40 years, from depending on which data set you look at, 1 in 10,000 cases to today, about 1 in 35, and 1 in 31 is probably even closer to what the data is showing right now cases, and so it's a serious issue, and it's one that they're trying to get to the bottom of.
And one thing also that stuck out in my mind, I was doing just some research. From what I understand, the number one lobby, and it's just like kind of logical as a layperson in the country, is the pharmaceutical lobby. I think to the extent of over $10 billion a year. And I always wondered to myself, is that if it's so good for you, if drugs and vaccines, because that's what they put out as products into American society, are so good for you, then why do they need to spend $10 billion a year lobbying as the number one lobby in the entire country? It was just didn't understand that. It was just a question that I saw that I was like, "Oh, that's a lot of money."
Well, they
So,
figured out a shortcut to profits. I mean, at the end of the day, they're not lobbying because of altruism. They're not lobbying because of They're lobbying because it's within their business interests, their financial interests, right? There was a boardroom decision or somewhere along the executive chain decision that this lobbying dollars makes sense from a financial perspective, from a business perspective. If it didn't, they wouldn't do it, right?
Mm,
Okay. So then how does lobbying cause them to increase dollars? And in many ways, that have nothing to do with vaccines, do drugs and so forth. I mean, they lobby for all kinds of things are lobbying. CMS is a $1 trillion almost agency. Just CMS is the biggest agency in the federal government. Okay, that's the
mhm,
agency that handles Medicare and Medicaid and so forth. That one agency is $1 trillion. Where does most of that money flow to? It flows into the pockets of pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare industry. So they have a lot of dollar incentives to influence how that agency does any little change in any little rule can cause a lot of different changes. Now,
mm,
when it comes to vaccines in particular, they've come to a great shortcut, right? Whereby they have a business model that is unprecedented. There's nothing else that has this business model. Imagine I came to you and I said, "Hey, listen, I got a great business idea." And you say, "What is?" I said, "Well, we're going to sell this thing called a widget." And you're to say, "Well, what is it?" I said, "Don't worry, it gets injected into the arm." Like, "Ooh, injected into the arm. It's gonna modify the immune system." "Oh, well, what happens if it hurts people?" "Don't worry, federal government's gonna give us immunity."
mm,
"Really? Well, what if people don't wanna take it anyway?" "Don't worry, we're gonna get the government to mandate it to go to school, so you have to take it." "Well, but what if parents start rising up?" "Don't worry, the federal government's gonna spend literally billions promoting this product every year, so people even believe in it, even if it causes harm, and well, what if people just don't wanna pay for it? Don't worry, federal government's also gonna pay for it, which they do, something called the Vaccine for Children program pays for 50% of all vaccines are paid for by the government. If you can't afford a vaccine, government pays for it, and so you don't I mean, think about it. Guaranteed payment, no liability, mandated product, free promotion. Who wouldn't want to go into this business model? And
mm,
that is the childhood business model. That is what this law, the National Child Vaccine Injury of 1986 created. Created this perverse system that doesn't prioritize childhood health. It actually creates an inverse financial incentive when it comes to childhood health, unfortunately. A child in
mm,
1986 would have gotten 3 injections in the first year of life on the CDC schedule. 3 in 1986. Child today, following the CDC schedule, would get 29 injections, including in utero, on the first by 1 year of
mm,
life. Think about that differential. And every one of those products was clinical trialed and licensed by a company knowing that they would never be able to be sued for killing or injuring a kid on the basis they could have made their product safer. I mean,
mm.
that is, it creates a perverse and it creates a moral hazard of epic proportions, in my view. So,
And I just saw something interesting a few weeks ago as well, where Pfizer there was a press conference where Pfizer was gonna invest about $70 billion into the US. The president was there and Secretary Kennedy was there, and I thought something just didn't sit well with me on that. I don't know if you had an opinion. I don't know if Pfizer's been around 150 years maybe. I don't know if they've, right, talk about the cures, right? I always like reverse engineer things. But meanwhile, the touting the situation as like this amazing investment opportunity and as a
I think
company.
it's great I think it's great if pharmaceutical companies want to invest in developing products. I think it's exactly what should happen, but the government needs to get out of the business of
Mm,
these products. Right? It's not the investment's not the problem. Pfizer wants to invest in developing a product, that's great. And if it had a liability for the injuries, if the '86 Act didn't exist, it would be sure to make sure it's developing a safe product before it goes to market because it doesn't wanna end up upside down financially, right? And if it didn't have
100%.
mandates, it'd have to persuade the public, have to do its own marketing, go down the list of issues. The issue is the government's involvement. The government needs to get out of the business entirely of these products. No mandates, no promotion. It needs to act like a regulator. You
Mm,
expect that when the FDA reviews these products and the CDC promotes that whatever is involved, that they're really acting like regulators. They're overseeing the industry. They're pushing back. That's what expect as a citizen for any other product. You expect that when the When they're looking at nuclear power plants, they're making sure those things are safe. That they're making sure when they're acting as regulators with planes, they're making sure they're not falling out of the sky, right? That's why, for
Mm.
example, with when it comes to planes, let's use that one. There's one agency called the Department of Transportation that promotes more aviation. The NTSB, a completely independent agency, is responsible for safety. Nuclear power, again, totally separated between the Department of Energy and another agency. Totally separated. Promotion versus safety. But when vaccines, there's no separation. All of it's under the roof of one department, the Department of Health and Human Services, in which the CDC, FDA, all the health agencies are located.
I get this a lot. People hear, people read your book. Where does a layperson, they're just beginning research, people are so busy, they're trying to make a living doing whatever they're doing. Where would you say is a good starting point that's simple? Simple, right? You always open up like every drug or every vaccine, right? There's this packet. It's not simple at all. Not a lawyer, you're just a simple person listening to the show. You're like, oh, interesting.
Right.
What do I do? What's my action plan?
Well, I would say read my book.
Eh,
I mean, I wrote it kind of like as a consumer report, right? You're gonna buy a car for your son or your daughter who's just learning to drive. What are you gonna probably do? You're just gonna pull up the consumer report for the crash test. You wanna know how safe it is, right? Now, there's a few ways you can do that with vaccines. You could pull up the package insert in section 6.1. It's actually pretty short, and you could look at the clinical trial. But if you want the big picture, you can read my book. That's obviously a little longer, but I wrote it in in a fun, engaging way. I at least I believe I did, and I've gotten good feedback so far. The other place you can go if you want something shorter than that, you can go to icandecide.org, and there's a Get Informed section, and they have a one pager, they have a 10 pager, and they have something a little longer. You could do that if you want something shorter than my book or something a little less technical than the package insert. I'd say those would be one of the 3 options to begin with, in
mm.
terms of starting to take a look at this. But I do implore everybody to look at it. It's a very important decision. It the reason I wrote the book is so people will start thinking of vaccines as products. It's not about saying vaccines are good or bad. It's not about say being anti or pro. I'm not anti or pro cars. I don't think they're good or bad. I don't think sheetrock is good or bad. I'm not anti and pro sheetrock. The point is to think, stop believing in the products.
I saw our doctor, our Surgeon General, Dr. Ladapo, here in Florida. He said, you know what? Give the power away from the government and let all choices of vaccine or anything you put into your body, let it be your personal choice. What do you think about that? Because there's a lot of pushback I saw on that concept. So, what's your thought on that? If it will go that idea nationwide?
Well, I sure hope it goes nationwide, and your Surgeon General deserves incredible amount of credit for doing what's bold and what's right. All he is doing, really, as long with your governor, is making it so Florida has the same freedom as Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Australia, most provinces in Canada, all of which don't mandate vaccines. Think about that. They don't mandate them. That's all he was is doing. He's leaving it to the parents, to the individual to make a decision, which is exactly what informed consent requires. The
Mm,
idea of informed consent rose out of one of the darkest periods of human history. The idea that you inform the patient of the risks and benefits, you inform them with whatever other information you deem appropriate, and then they choose whether to consent. That is what informed consent is. You inform me, I choose whether to consent. And if I don't consent, that has to be the end of it. That's where it should end. Mandating, coercing over that is antithetical to informed consent. It is exactly what this country was founded against. When we think of the United States of America, what was it a rebellion against? What was this form of government that we, have had here for
mm,
over 200 years? Really, what did it arise out of? It arose out of, and if I may, the notion that we all have inalienable civil and individual rights, that we are better off making our own choices rather
Mm,
than having those decided by a king, a dictator, a board, a central bureau, somebody else, right? That is what every other form of government, for the most part,
mm,
that preceded this one was. It was a rebellion against that, right? It's the idea that individual and civil rights, they come with danger. Freedom of speech comes with danger. Letting us say what we want comes with danger. Assemble what we want. Practice what religion we want. Sure, those all come with dangers, but the greater danger in the American tradition is ceding those rights to the government. The greater danger is letting the government decide, because that always leads to tyranny. Because you know what happens when the government decides? You saw it during COVID. You've seen it in every other context, right? When the government says to you, okay, do this, and you don't agree, well, you know what the government does then? It goes, well, they're not listening. Oh, well, then you know what maybe we have to do? We have to censor. Oh, they're still not listening. Okay, let's use a little coercion. They're still not listening. More coercion, more bullying, take away their rights. No school for you,
mm,
no job for you, no public transportation for you, no social media posting for you. You got to live in your home. No go to church for you, right? I mean, that is what happens. That is the descent into tyranny. And the whole idea behind freedom, when you say free, what does freedom mean? Freedom means having the government not interfere with your life. The Bill of Rights are a limitation on what the government can do. That's what it is. And so, absolutely, I think that your Surgeon General has got it right on every score. You
mm,
know, the government, if it wants you to take a product, persuade you on the merits. What's wrong with that? I don't need to persuade you to eat, drink, do other things that are healthy. Let them persuade you. If these products are so safe and effective, it should be an easy job.
mm. What would you say is the common denominator of people? Because your journey is a journey of courage. What would you say is the common denominator of people that you found through your journey that have courage to stand up for things that are different than the regular path? Everybody's saying this, and I'm going to ask questions. What is going on inside of them, of these people?
I mean, when you look at your Surgeon General, I don't think he is guided in any way by his career. He's not putting his career first, his personal interests first, his reputation first. The vitriol and onslaught he knows he's going to receive. He's putting what's right first. Where does that come from? Comes from a place of integrity that he has, some deep
Mm,
abiding integrity to the what's right and what he believes is right and what's true. Look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr., look at Secretary Kennedy. He was a Kennedy. He was living, a dream life. He had a million institutions that all had him on as an honorary member and pay him salary just to use his name. He was in the cover of every magazine, hailed as a hero and a celebrity when he was cleaning up the environment. The left loved him. He was a darling, right? Cleaning up the Hudson River, fighting polluters and so forth. And then he learned something about vaccines he couldn't unlearn.
mm,
And he could have easily walked away. He could have walked away from it, but he
mm,
didn't. He has suffered the onslaught of every possible thing you could do to a man. He's lost every position. He's lost every stream. All of the papers that used to hail him attack him, right? His family even attacks him, but he knows what's right, and he's gonna stand in his truth, and he's not gonna back down. What makes a Secretary Kennedy? What makes a Surgeon General Ladapo? What makes these men, no matter what you say about them, no matter what you do to them, do the right thing? Whew, that's a tough question.
mm.
But you know it when you see it, and they have it. They have that courage, and they do what's right. I would say that you judge a person by what they do, not by what they say. And on that score, they are to be, I think, judged very well, in my opinion, whatever the papers say about them.
Well, I want to say thank you so much, Aaron. And I love the book, Vaccines Amen, The Religion of Vaccines. And I do think it is good for lay people. It is a good starting point. It's very good. It lays it out very clearly. And I want to wish you the best of luck. And thank you so much, Aaron. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Been great. Thank you for tuning in. If you're enjoying Common Denominator, make sure to hit like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a review and share the podcast with a friend for more stories that inspire, challenge, and connect us all. We appreciate you listening.